Good evening. Today is Memorial Day here in the United States, May 28th, 2018. My name is Jose Nunez, and I am a former regular pioneer and ministerial servant. I never thought that I would be making one of these videos, but I think it's become very important that we all start to speak out. I've watched a few videos and I've seen the courage of a lot of people who have been victims, who have dealt with a lot of things, and it's not easy, but the truth really does need to be spoken. I was raised in the quote-unquote truth from an early age. I grew up in New York City, so my family surrounded us with Bethelites, and of course, like most young boys at that time, I dreamed of becoming a Bethelite myself. Worked very hard. I was one of the youngest publishers. Got baptized at 15, which back then was the normal age. I feel like now they're pushing for younger and younger, but back then that was, pretty standard. I auxiliary pioneered all through school and, did the normal witness lifestyle growing up. Now, when I was very young, I was sexually molested by our next door neighbor, who was a regular pioneer. When I went to approach my parents about it at the time, when I was a child, they accused me of slandering one of Jehovah's appointed servants. They made it very clear that they would not believe me over someone with such a good reputation in Jehovah's organization. I was 5 at the time. So I was continually molested by this woman as she was our babysitter. It got to the point where she had me perform sexual acts on my siblings for her entertainment. She was quite twisted, and she also physically abused me. Something that went on for quite a few years. Later on, we would move halfway across the state, and there I thought we would have a fresh start. I was still a young kid. I was just about to start junior high school, and I thought, well, okay, here we go, fresh start, new congregation, I'm away from that monster, things are going to be great. But there was a well-known pedophile in that congregation. Well-known. Many families knew that this guy was going around and molesting kids, but no one would warn other families. So when new families moved in, such as ours, we had no idea. And these other families would see him go and visit new families and get to know them and invite himself over to their cookouts and stuff like this, and not one person would raise a red flag, would say anything. The young man who was doing these atrocities was the son of the presiding overseer at the time. So there was kind of a force field around him of no harm to come to him. He did proceed to molest my sisters. This young man was different than most pedophiles in that he didn't have a sexual preference. It was more of an age thing. So my mom, knowing full well the type of person he was, would see him coming up to our door, and she would send me out to ask him to take me, out somewhere to his house or to a swimming pool or whatever, because she didn't want my sisters to get molested. And she couldn't turn him in. She couldn't turn him into the elders, and obviously could not turn him into the police. This went on for quite a while. He molested his own nieces, and other elders' children, and yet still, nothing was done. Nothing was done at all. This went on for a while. While I was causing diversion so that he would not touch my sisters, he then proceeded to molest me as well. Like I said, this went on for quite some time. I felt horrible. I felt guilty. As soon as I was old enough to realize that this was all bad, and all the guilt landed on me. I felt like there was something I must be doing to attract this kind of a person. The incidents that I had in then touching my siblings when I was a small child, I felt that I had become this monster as well. This went on, and I attempted suicide. Fortunately, it did not work. I decided that my problem was lack of spirituality, so I delved into the organization. I went full force. I read everything I could. I read the Bible cover to cover. I read the aid book when we still had the aid book. Everything that I could do. I had many studies, went out field service. I would do street work on the way to school. The whole gamut. Later on, I started noticing a pattern in the Kingdom Hall, and I went to report it, and I was told that reporting something like that would just bring reproach upon Jehovah's name, so I should leave it alone. At a young age, I was disfellowshipped, and then a year later reinstated, and I went with it, and I did what I needed to do to get back in my family's graces, because during that year, even though I was a kid still living at home, my own parents would not speak to me in my own home. I could not eat dinner with my family. I had to eat in the family room while everyone else ate in the dining room. I was not allowed to play game night with them, or go to the movies with them, or have any activities with them, because I was, spiritually dead in their eyes. So with that fear and with all that cutting off, I worked very hard to come back. I was very dissatisfied with the things I was seeing in the congregation, the cover-ups, the stuff that was going on. It just didn't make any sense to me. So I moved to North Carolina, and I started fresh there, just absolutely convinced that it had to be the congregation, that this could not be Jehovah's organization. This could not be the way that this works. So I went there, and it was a lot more of the same. I could see a lot of things, and I could see a lot of hushing up, and it just really wasn't a really good environment. I would disassociate myself later on, and I would join the Army. I met my wife, had my kids. When my kids were little, my wife at the time was starting to search for some religious upbringing for them. She came across the Witnesses and started studying. And they had that new book, What Does the Bible Really Teach? And I thought, maybe they've turned things around. Maybe they've seen the light. The light gets brighter and brighter as we get closer to the end. So maybe that's what's happened here. And I worked and got reinstated. After that time, I went to nursing school, and I became a nurse, and I became involved in pediatrics. Now, as a pediatric nurse, I am a mandated reporter, which means that if I witness or made aware of abuse, sexual abuse, anything like that, I must report it. Well, while I was working hard in the organization and became a regular pioneer and then eventually ministerial servant, I started to notice that there were some things going on again. And I went to my mentor, one of the elders in the congregation, the secretary, and I spoke to him about what was going on. And he informed me that the society has matters well in hand, that they don't tolerate pedophiles anymore, and that all this stuff is being taken care of. Well, I blindly believed him, and I wanted with all my heart to believe him. I really did. I really wanted to believe that God was directing this organization, and that God was watching over these congregations, and that finally justice was coming. That was not the case. It really was not the case at all. As a mandated reporter, I started to give information. It took a while for some of the elders to figure out what was going on, figure out who was dispensing information. I was spoken to, at first in a very kind of lighthearted manner. The elder that I always confided in, he came up to me and he was explaining how, the way that the world sees things is not the way that Jehovah sees things, and that we should leave things in Jehovah's hands, because Jehovah will make things right in his due time, but that we have to have confidence and faith that Jehovah is handling his organization, and that as such we should have the confidence to leave it in his direction. And I felt very guilty. In fact, I'm not going to lie, I was scared. But I couldn't stop. So I kept reporting, and I kept talking. This went on for a little while. It got worse, and the pressure became more. I witnessed a brother in the congregation go to discipline his child for acting up in the hall. You're not going to believe this, but imagine a 3-year-old wouldn't sit completely still for 2 hours of talks that he can't relate to or understand. What was wrong with this child? Anyway, so as many witness parents do, they take their kids out to the coat room or whatever and give them a quick spanking and stuff like that. And even though that always bothered me, I kind of thought, well, that's not really abuse, it's just a little swat. But this young man took his child and beat that child. I went back there and I told him that he needed to stop or I was going to call the police. And he looked at me like I was some kind of alien from another planet and said, "What are you doing? This is not your concern. I'm disciplining my child. You take care of your children and leave me alone." And I said, I'm a mandated reporter by law, and what you're doing is against the law, and it is harmful. And I have to report this. I'm giving you one chance. Stop right now. Well, he stopped, but then right after the meeting, he went to the elders, and I got called into a room. And I was explained that, again, I needed to leave things alone, and that the world doesn't understand how Christians discipline their children. That the world will think it's abuse because they're very lax and they have no discipline and no care for bringing up responsible, respectful children. That's why Jehovah's people are unique, because we raise respectful children. I was scared to death, but I stirred up the courage and I looked them straight in the eye and said, I am a mandated reporter. That is the law. If I witness abuse, I am going to report it. Plain and simple. This discussion is over. And I walked out. My meeting attendance would become less and less. And I pretty much became inactive because I was terrified if I walked into a hall, I was going to have to report something. And And I didn't want my children around it anymore. I couldn't trust the elders. I couldn't trust people in the hall, to be honest, to tell the truth, to protect each other. This is supposed to be Jehovah's people. This is supposed to be a worldwide family. We're supposed to all be there to protect each other, to have each other's back. And I couldn't trust the person sitting next to me. It was pretty heartbreaking. Now my family are all witnesses. As you can imagine, where all the fear comes from. My wife, my parents, my siblings, they were all witnesses. My mother was recruited by a local elder to talk to me. My mother was not in our congregation. She wasn't even in the state. She's halfway across the country. But she reached out to me and explained to me that I was going to really mess up my chances of moving up the ladder, becoming an elder and eventually a circuit overseer, by this nonsense, as she put it. And I tried very hard to express to her that it's wrong. It's just wrong. There was a couple whose 3-year-old girl was molested, and eventually that would come out, and eventually there were charges, and that was a good thing. And I'm not going to bring their names back up now because that's all said and done, and they've been through hell and high water and back. But at the time, they had been instructed not to go to the authorities, that it would bring reproach. And when I confronted one of the elders about that, they said that, well, it's a parent's choice. Okay. And technically it is. And they don't say to the parent, you cannot go to the authorities. But they use phrases like, would a Christian, a true Christian, go to the authorities knowing full well that the only thing it would accomplish is to bring reproach upon Jehovah's holy name? Would a true Christian want to engage in something that would drag the organization down? Was that something that a true Christian would do? Or would a true Christian rely on the elders and the faithful and discreet slave to handle things Jehovah's way? See, so when it's worded like that, how many parents do you think really are going to say, yeah, I'm still going to the cops? They're not. They're not. And the implication is that if they do, then they're not true Christians. And therefore, their standing in the congregation is in jeopardy. That's pretty much the way it goes. When I kept pushing, I spent years as a pediatric nurse, looking out for kids and advocating for them. That's my life, And whether it was in the hospital or on a home visit or anywhere, my priority, my main concern was advocating for children. This is something that it's become my life passion, and I don't want to walk away from it. And I'm sure part of it is because of what happened to me and what happened to my siblings and what happened to my friends. I'm sure all of that plays into it. But I see the horrific things that happen to kids. As a nurse, a pediatric nurse, you see things that you can't unsee, and your heart just breaks over and over again. And then when you see people trying to cover it up, trying to hide it, that's just disgusting. I tried one more time. I went to the elders and I expressed deep concern over the 2-witness rule. Now, in case you're not familiar with it, it's basically this. You can't accuse a brother or a sister of doing any wrongdoing unless you have 2 witnesses or more. So basically, a child confesses to his parents or her parents that she was touched by brother so-and-so. And they go to the elders, and the elders say, well, did two adults see this? Because the child's not a credible witness. Well, it's amazing, and I try to explain this to the elders, but pedophiles don't normally draw a crowd when they engage in their activities. They don't normally make sure that there's a group witnessing them. They have this weird thing of doing it in secret and in private. So these poor children are then looked at as liars, are looked at as unreliable sources. If the parents try to push the elders to form a committee or whatever, the elders will shut them down very quickly. And one of the things they'll say is that, without two witnesses to discuss this, without two witnesses to confirm that this thing happened, then we could be falsely accusing a brother, and what would that do to his reputation and to his family and to his standing in the congregation and standing in the community, and what kind of reproach would that bring to our congregation, and what kind of reproach would that bring to the organization as a whole, and eventually to Jehovah's God. So this poor child is going to be deemed a liar, be told that there's no help for them, no concern for them, and basically it'll be made very clear that the reputation of the pedophile is of tremendously more importance than the safety of the child. I tried so hard to express to these brothers how pedophiles operate, how they work, and it was to no avail. Their main concern was the way that it would look if someone in the congregation was arrested for this behavior. Once again, they assured me, the society takes very, very strongly pedophiles, and we would never, tolerate it. And I said, so, okay, a person is a pedophile. Let's say they confess. Let's say that they completely come forward and say, yes, I did these horrible things. Then what? Well, if they're repentant, they'll get privately reproved. So let me, for those of you who don't know what that means, let me explain to you what that means. What that means is this person will lose any privileges that they have in the congregation. So they can't lead a group. They would not be able to give talks. They would not be able to lead a field service, the ministry. They lose. They wouldn't even be able to comment during meetings. They would lose all their privileges. And it could take, like 6 months, maybe a year to get them back. That's the full extent. That's it. Well, as you can imagine, I expressed some irritation with that. And I said, well, just between us, the society has sent a letter that basically states that anyone who admits to being a pedophile, Jehovah takes that very strongly, and they could never have a position of responsibility in the congregation, ever. They're not permitted to have anything because that's how strongly Jehovah takes it. Well, the reality is that if a congregation normally appoints a pedophile into a position like ministerial servant or elder, they can face legal trouble. It has nothing to do with Jehovah God, unfortunately. So then again, we were at an impasse. I became a little bit more vocal. I visited the elders more and more often. Once again, my mom was recruited. My mom is a person who sees opportunities. She always groomed her children to as she called it, play the game to get the glory. Now, that doesn't sound very witnessy, does it? But my mom figured out a long, long time ago that there was a lot of politics involved in being a witness, and that those who knew how to play the game could climb up the ladder very, very quickly. So it was important to play the game. Now, I'm not saying that my mother is not a true believer, or anything like that. I don't know. I assume that she is a diehard Jehovah's Witness, true believer. She just realized that there were aspects in the organization that she could manipulate. Let's just leave it at that. Okay. So, when my mom could not reach out to me, could not reason with me, her and this one elder started having constant conversations. So one day I get this call, and it's from the elder, and he says that your mom's coming into town, and we'd like to have a meeting with you at the Kingdom Hall. I have no idea what this is about. At this point, I've been inactive for a few months, other than my constant harassing of the elder body. I had no idea what it was about. So I called my mom up to ask her what was going on, and she asked me if I was done with the nonsense. And I said, it's not nonsense. These are children. These are children's lives. These are families. These are things that should not be happening in Jehovah's organization. At one point we're going to have to answer to Jehovah, and how can we sit there and say, oh, we allowed all these children to be harmed, we allowed them all to be hurt, we allowed all this stuff to happen, but hey, we kept Jehovah's name out of the newspaper. Do you think God cares about that? He wants how you're taking care of these children. That's what you're going to be accountable for. She became very irritated with me and told me that I really needed to reconsider, or else. And I said, or else what? I'm not doing anything wrong. Even by the society standards, I can't be accused of anything. I haven't done anything. I said, I'm married, I'm faithful, I pay my taxes, I go to work. No, I'm not making meetings, but I haven't celebrated holidays, I haven't done anything political. There's nothing that they can use on me. So what's the issue? And she said, just really reconsider. I said, there's really nothing to reconsider. And she said, well, how would you feel if you were falsely accused? And I said, we're not talking about false accusations here, okay? I mean, it's something that really needs to be addressed. We're talking about victim after victim after victim. This is not right. So she said, well, I hope it doesn't come back to bite you. I could not get a straight answer out of her as to what this whole thing was about, what was going on. So I just let it go. The elder that was cohorting with her worked in the same hospital I worked in, and he said, well, you really need to make that meeting. And I said, is it a judicial committee? He says, well, I'm not at liberty to say. And I said, if it's a committee, just tell me it's a committee and tell me what's going on. He says, well, no, it's not a committee, but it's a very important meeting. Who's going to be there? He says, well, people will be there. It's very important. You have to be there. I'm like, well, I'm not going to go. He says, you have to go. You don't have a choice. So what do you mean I don't have a choice? Am I going to be disfellowshipped if I don't go? He says, well, I don't know. So what do you mean you don't know? I haven't done anything wrong. He says, well, we'll see. Okay. I went with my wife and my kids, and I went to the hall on this meeting day, whatever, and there was my mom and two of my sisters. I hadn't seen my sisters in forever. I'm like so happy. I'm running up and giving them hugs and stuff like this, and they're just standing there, rigid, obviously scared. Have no idea what's going on. So we get called back into the conference room, and if anybody's been a witness here for more than 10 minutes, you know what room I'm talking about. Long table, lots of chairs, elders on one side, whatever. And there's my mom, my siblings, and two elders. And I thought, this is very, very odd. And they start with a prayer and reading a scripture and whatever. And then my mother says to me that she's here to present evidence that me, am a pedophile. I laughed. I just absolutely was like, are you kidding me right now? This is the best thing you've got? This is what you're going to do? You're going to try to turn the tables? I said, go for it. Go ahead. Present your whatever. And I'm sorry. Right now I can laugh at it, but at the time I was so hurt. I was so devastated. I just, my eyes welled up. My heart just broke. And she commanded my sisters to tell these accounts. Right away, there was a few things wrong with the accounts. I moved out of my house when I was 17. These accounts that they were recounting, they would have happened by their dates, not mine, by their dates. They would have happened while I was living in North Carolina, and they were still in New York State. The events didn't make any sense. The dates didn't make any sense, and it was really weird how my sister spoke. My sisters are very Latino, very expressive, very hands and emotions and just all over the place, right? And they were very rigid and speaking like robots, and they had like a step-by-step accounting, and they had this exact same order in which they proceeded. First Samantha and then Lorraine. Boom, 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 boom. Step by step by step by step. So I said, this is what I'm going to tell you. When I was a small child and I was being molested constantly, I was made to touch my siblings. This is all before the age of 10. And I have never stopped feeling horrible about it. I have never stopped feeling guilty about it. And once again, as always, I apologize deeply from the bottom of my heart that I was made to do those things. I never would have done anything like that on my own recourse. But this woman was very abusive and very forceful. Still, I feel guilty, and still I feel bad. And I said, and if that's what you are speaking of, and you are hurt, my God, I completely understand. And I can't even apologize enough. And they proceed to say, well, yeah, that, but then in this year and in this year and this year, and I'm like, those years don't even make sense. You've got a year when I was in North Carolina. You've got another year when I was away in basic training. These dates don't add up. These events don't add up. I said, and one of them, I told to my one sister, and one of them, you weren't even living in the States at the time. You were in Puerto Rico. Don't you remember? And they just would repeat exactly the same sentences in rigid structure over and over again. And my mother would just sit there and stare at them. And they would just look at her, you know, and she would give them a nod, and they would repeat the same sentence structure again and again. The elders asked for a little hiatus, and my sisters went into the kitchen area, and my mom went to the main hall, and I followed her, and I said, what is going on here? And she says, well, you brought this on yourself. I said, what are you talking about? She says, do you think you can go against the society, go against the organization, and not have repercussions? And I said, you're admitting that you're making this up to get me to stop. She says, I'm not making anything up. I'm not admitting anything. I'm just saying there are repercussions when you cross the line. This is my mom. My mother, my flesh and blood. So I started making some phone calls while the elders were deliberating. I started making some phone calls because I still had a few friends in Bethel. And I spoke to a couple people and realized very quickly that this is not right. And what I mean by that is not just the lies that were being told, but the entire meeting should not have taken place the way it had taken place. First of all of the accusation dates that they had brought up were during times when I was not a baptized witness. Now, what you need to understand about that is this. If I was not a baptized witness, then the congregation has no authority over it. I don't know if that was done on purpose or if that's why the dates were off. Was it because my mother wanted to scare me but didn't want a real committee to be formed or whatever? I'm not sure. But it didn't make any sense. Anyway, so I go back in and I said, first of all, with all due respect to my sisters and whatever memories that they may have, this is not true. This is absolutely not the case. I can prove every single one of those. I have military discharge papers. I have, items from when I was in North Carolina. I have lots of different things that I can do to prove that the dates are wrong. So I feel like this is being manipulated. I'm not going to get into all that. I don't want to be starting to fling mud, but let's just say that this is not right. Also, if this is a committee, why are there only 2 elders here and not 3? Okay? Also, since none of these supposed events that never happened supposedly happened during times when I was not a baptized witness, that means that elders have no jurisdiction on this. This would be what the society would call a family matter, not a theocratic matter. So why are we doing this here in the Kingdom Hall? Why are you elders here? What's going on? Well, my family was dismissed, and the elders decided that they would talk to me. Ironically, these are the 2 same elders who I was constantly bringing up my concerns with. And they said to me, basically, that they were going to do me a favor and not disfellowship me. Now, at this point, I had gone from being fearful or being nervous or being heartbroken to just being plain out angry because I had just gotten off the phone and I knew that all of this was just bogus. So I looked at them and I said,